Biotechnology, pharmaceutical companies are working really hard to develop this vaccine. We've been talking about it for months. Where are we? I know Pfizer just today announced that it's going to start testing this on children. Where are we right now when it comes to a coronavirus vaccine? How close are we to getting it to the American people?
So I can't predict when the vaccine will be available to the American people. That will be dependent upon when the data comes to FDA from these clinical trials. What I can tell you, Dylan, is that there are 4 phase 3 clinical trials that are currently in the U.S. Data accrue from these clinical trials. And what happens is that the manufacturers, the developers of the vaccines, work with something called a data safety monitoring board, which is an independent board which assesses the data. When they determine that the data are mature, that the information from the clinical trial is mature, then they put that together in an application and send it to the FDA. And at FDA, we look at the data from the clinical trial to determine the safety and effectiveness of that vaccine. The good news is at least 2 of these late-stage clinical trials started at the end of July and early August. So they've moved along pretty well in terms of the development process. But until FDA gets the information in an application, we can't even begin to look at that information. What I can tell you is that FDA scientists, and we have 17,000 plus doctors, scientists, nurses, pharmacists, will look at the data from the vaccine trials, and we will make a determination about the safety and effectiveness of that vaccine based upon our very rigorous criteria. We also plan to convene an external group called a Vaccine Advisory Committee, which is external vaccine experts outside of FDA who will also look at data and give us their opinion about the status of the data and how that could help us inform our decision. Once we put all that together, then we'll make a decision about the safety and efficacy of the vaccine. We're going to expedite the process, but we will not cut any corners.
Talking about a timeline, I know it's hard to tell because everything is so fluid, but in your experience, when these developments go into phase 3 trials, how long does that normally take before it can get to you and the FDA? In your past experiences, I know you said a bunch are in phase 3. How long would it normally take? I know these are different drugs, different vaccines, but when things are in phase 3, how long are they normally in phase 3 for?
So Dylan, it really depends upon the underlying prevalence, the amount of disease that's in the community where you're testing it. As you can imagine, if you're doing the trial in an area that doesn't have a lot of COVID-19, it'll take longer because what you want to see is the phase 3 trials compare an active vaccine versus a placebo, an inactive vaccine. And what you want to see is the active vaccine preventing people from getting COVID-19 disease. And so it really depends upon the underlying disease. It can take months. It can take years to have the data mature from a trial. Now, our expectation is that it would be on the shorter side of the timeline just because we do have active cases of COVID-19 in the country. But again, really hard to prejudge that because those data are kept by the manufacturers under some very secure rules for these clinical trials. And only when they have a signal from those clinical trials are they able then to unlock that clinical trial, look at it, and make a determination whether it's mature enough to send to us.
You said you'll expedite the process but won't cut corners. How do you find that balance? Because there's clearly a lot of pressure on these companies to develop it, then get it to you to approve it. Everyone's waiting for this thing. How do you balance expediting this without cutting corners and making sure this is safe for the American people?
Well, Dylan, that's a superb question. What we've done is we've been very explicit about the criteria we want to use to make a determination about the safety and effectiveness of a vaccine. So by doing that, we've told these developers, here's what you need to build into your clinical trial. Here's what we need to see in an application. Here's what we need to know about the quality manufacturing of the vaccine. So they're already working on a lot of this information to send to us. And we've been working with them in real time during the development process. So one of the ways that we do this is to communicate and to constantly have an update from them about about the development process. Now, we don't have the data, and we'll have to wait for the data from the clinical trial, but we've set the expectation about what we need to see. So in a normal process, it may be that at the end of a clinical trial, when the manufacturer says, okay, we're done, the data are mature, it may take them months to put an application in. But because we've telegraphed ahead of time what we need to see, that timeline should be shortened. Also at FDA, as we've done throughout the pandemic, we have all hands on deck for this. So we're prepared to receive that application. We're prepared to look at it, and we have people on standby to do that. We're also prepared to schedule this vaccine advisory committee at a moment's notice when we get an application so that we can expedite as much as possible. But what we won't do is, well, what we will do, let me put it that way, is that we will follow the rigorous criteria that we've set out. And we plan to be transparent about the process so that people can see that while at the same time we understand the urgency of the situation, we also know that we have to keep our sacred promise to the American people that we will use our rigorous criteria to determine safety and effectiveness.
You said you have all these people on standby waiting for this application. Once you get an application, how long do you think it would take for you to look at this thing and say, let's go? Is there, I know it could take months, years for the vaccine to develop, but once it's on your desk and you're reading this application, how long until it can get out? I know I'm asking a lot of timeline questions and it's hard to know because everything's so fluid, but I think a lot of people are just saying, when are we going to get this vaccine? And now that I have a chance to talk to you, I'm trying to find out sort of a timeline of when this could happen.
Well, in a normal situation, approval process, it would take us months to look at an application. And you remember, some of these applications are tens of thousands of pages long. And one thing that FDA does that other regulatory agencies around the world do not do is that we don't look at a scientific paper or a press release or someone else's conclusions. We look at the raw data from a clinical trial and we analyze it ourselves and we draw our own conclusions. Now, that being said, we want to compress that as much as possible. So we don't expect it to take the same amount of time that it would be for a normal process, but we expect it to be shorter than that. But really, Dylan, it depends upon the complexity of the data that comes before us. Because as I said, we want to make sure that we apply our rigorous criteria. So the more complicated and more in volume of data we receive, the longer it's going to take us to do that. Again, I don't want to prejudge how long that'll take, but we are very cognizant of the fact that we're in a public health emergency, that we want to get life-saving therapies and vaccines to the American people as quickly, but as safely as possible.
President Trump has come out, and I know that they have a deal with Moderna for these doses. President Trump says that 100 million doses could be available by January, and everyone could have access to a vaccine by the spring. Is that feasible? Is that possible?
Well, it's a question best addressed by Department of Health and Human Services because they are leading the effort of what's called Operation Warp Speed. And they're doing that, and what's been done is what's called manufacturing at risk, meaning before FDA makes a determination around safety and effectiveness, many of these manufacturers are already making vaccine. So the plan is to get as many of these doses available as soon as possible so that we can fulfill our promise to the American people of getting it to them as soon as is humanly possible.
Right. Is it right? So, but is it, I know it's a question better for the part of Human Services, but is it possible for your, because you're approving this thing and you're looking, and you can sort of tell when things are going to could happen. Is it possible that 100 million doses could be available by January 1st? It's only 2.5 months away.
Yeah, Dylan, I don't have access to that information, so I don't know. I do know that the manufacturing at risk is occurring. So again, I don't know the exact information around doses. It is realistic to assume that once or if an approval or authorization occurs from FDA, that vaccination can start very soon thereafter.
You know, another question, it seems like talking to people in town here, even if a vaccine was available, people might be hesitant to take the first coronavirus vaccine. Can you maybe put some people's minds at ease that if you guys approve it and it's out there ready to go, that it would be safe for them to take?
Well, FDA has been having oversight of vaccines for many, many years. We have incredible staff. We have incredible scientists who work on this. They have known what's needed to approve other vaccines in the past. And I have to tell you, I have complete and absolute faith in their incredible expertise. FDA is known around the world for having the highest standards for approval of medical products. And so by our being very transparent about the criteria we need to see, by our not allowing, but being transparent about the vaccine advisory committee, about the process we're going to use and the explanation we have to the American people, we want that to allay concerns about any vaccine, to know that America's FDA is on the job. We are applying our rigorous criteria, and we'll do so, and we will do it in a transparent fashion. And that's the transparency, this discussions like you and I are having now, Dylan, and our continuing communication to the American people is the best way that we can move forward in providing confidence to the American people about the vaccine.
You mentioned several times that this heavy criteria for these companies when they send the application to you. Can you maybe explain in layman's terms what some of the criteria is without getting into all the science and big words and stuff? Maybe for people watching, know what the criteria is for getting this thing approved?
Definitely, Dylan. So one of the criteria that's really important is the effectiveness. And we outlined in our guidance that we want the floor. Now, this is not the ceiling, this is the floor of vaccine effectiveness to be 50%. So the developers designed their clinical trials to make sure that they could detect at least 50% effectiveness. Now, we all want a vaccine that's highly effective, 80, 90, more plus percent, but that's the floor that we wanted to see. The second thing we said is that we needed a minimum follow-up of 2 months after the last dose of vaccine in 50% or more of the people in the trial. So what we want to do is be able to have enough follow-up so that we can adequately assess the safety of the vaccine. And as I said, we have a lot of experience on this, and our scientists determined that based upon our prior experience, a significant percentage of the serious effects would be seen in that 2-month period of time. So we've been very clear about why we've been doing that. And the other thing is these clinical trials are large. They have anywhere from 30 to 40 to 45,000 people in the clinical trials, which is a very large number of people for us to assess the safety and effectiveness of the vaccine. All of those go into our having great confidence in our ability to make a determination around safety and effectiveness.